Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 30 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to talk my guys. These are my guys that I believe in for the 2024 season that I think will be both great players for your fantasy teams and great values in your drafts. So I have 3 players picked out at each position, along with one honorable mention that was also under consideration. So I'm going to mention all those players, go through the reasons why I believe in them, and just give you some tips for how to handle your upcoming drafts. Now, this episode is coming out a little bit early, so this is coming out on Friday instead of Monday like we normally do, and that's for a couple reasons, but the number one reason is that this is a very popular draft weekend coming up, so I wanted to make sure that this episode got out to you in time to listen before you have your draft. So that's the biggest reason. I also have some travel plans going on. So just better for everyone to pump this episode out now, get it out, and give you some more fantasy football content as we get deep into redraft season. So with all that being said, as always, you can find the show on Twitter at Dynasty War Room. Go subscribe on YouTube at the same handle. And then you can find us on any platform that carries podcasts. So wherever you're listening now, make sure you follow the show. That way you don't miss any of our future episodes. And with all that being said, let's jump right into the My Guys. All right, so starting off with the quarterbacks. Now, some of these players are going to be players that I have talked about at great length, throughout this podcast. You know, all off-season long players that I've been into. But some of these guys are going to be ones that I maybe haven't talked about as much that I want to make sure I touch on that, hey, I really believe in these guys. And just because they haven't been as interesting from a dynasty standpoint during, the draft season and, things like that I still do really like them, that I'm still looking to add them to rosters, and players that I'm happy to have starting on contending teams. So at quarterback, my guy is going to be Trevor Lawrence from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, he's being drafted in redraft leagues on Sleeper, which is my platform of choice. He's going at QB 17, which is very late. So in my mind, he is really the last acceptable starter going off the draft board. The quarterbacks that go after him are Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Matt Stafford, and I don't think any of those players have anywhere near the amount of upside that Lawrence has. So to me, Lawrence at QB 17 is the last player that I'm comfortable with leaving a draft with as my number one starting quarterback in redraft. So that's important to me because I've always been a bit more of a late round quarterback drafter. I hesitate to take quarterbacks early, even though there are, lately, especially in recent years, having one of those top 2 or 3 quarterbacks can be a nice advantage, particularly if you've been able to get Josh Allen. But I just don't play that way. I don't like taking early quarterbacks. So to me, getting these values in the later rounds is how I really love to build my fantasy teams. And so he still has great weapons there in Jacksonville. Now, Calvin Ridley is gone, but they replaced him with Brian Thomas. Christian Kirk is back and healthy. I think he's a very good receiver. I love Evan Engram. And Lawrence is healthy. I think that, he battled a bit of an injury issue last year, and I still believe in the talent. And maybe I'm a sucker for that, but I don't believe that he's as bad as he was last year for fantasy. I still think that he can be one of those top-level quarterbacks. He's certainly being paid like it. So Trevor Lawrence, my guy going off the board at QB 17. Next up is Anthony Richardson. Now, he's a guy that I've talked about a ton this offseason. You probably could have guessed that he was going to be someone on this list. And he's being drafted as the QB 6. And we talked about him on the last show about being kind of a dark horse candidate that could be the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. And I think that's absolutely on the table if he stays healthy. Now, that's a huge if because he's already had injury last year, missing essentially the entire year outside of a few games. But he's also a very inconsistent passer. That was the big knock and the reason that a lot of people were very nervous about him coming out of Florida into the NFL, because we really weren't sure that he could do anything other than run. And I guess we really don't know that, but I am willing to take that risk because the upside is there. It's, he's a boom bust type of guy. So if you are somebody that likes to avoid risk at quarterback, or, you don't like draft, QB6 is still fairly high. I don't think it's all that unreasonable. This is probably about the earliest, and I normally might look to take a QB. But he has the weapons. He's looked good in the preseason. We've seen, some moments of, that inconsistency in the passing game, but he's been very good as well. And whether he ends up being a great quarterback for the Colts in real life is difficult to say. But for fantasy football, where the emphasis on the running quarterbacks is so high, he could be Justin Fields 2.0. But for fantasy, Justin Fields could be great. Now, I think that Anthony Richardson will be better than Justin Fields, so don't, be scared off by that comment. But I think there could be some light comparisons in terms of maybe he is significantly better for fantasy than he is in real life. But if he continues to develop, I think we could be talking about one of the upper echelon quarterbacks in the NFL, and I'm willing to jump on the hype train and draft him as QB6. Now, my guy at quarterback is going to be Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions, and he's being drafted on Sleeper as QB14. And one of the biggest reasons that I'm into Jared Goff this season, obviously he was great last year, had a top 10 season, but the big thing this year is he only plays 3 regular season games outdoors. 14 of the 17 games are going to be in a dome, which is awesome for Jared Goff. It's awesome for the Lions, great for fantasy. He is incredible at home. He's incredible in domes. He struggles the most when you're dealing with the elements outdoors. And so the fact that he doesn't really have to face that hardly at all this season is great. Now, one caveat to that is I believe 2 of those outdoor games, Chicago and San Francisco, come in week 16 and 17. So if you do draft Jared Goff and you are worried about the outdoor games and that competition, number one, I wouldn't necessarily overthink it at that point. If he's gotten you to the playoffs and he's delivered and has been better than QB14, he's been as good as he was last year, you probably don't want to overreact and swap him out in the playoffs, but have a backup, pick somebody up off waivers partway through the season to have a backup plan just in case you do want to swap somebody for those games. But Jared Goff is a very, very safe, high floor guy that has the ability to have some big weeks because he does have good weapons. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams, who, even though I may not be a JMO believer, he's still there for the big play, which is obviously great for Goff. So I'm a big believer in Jared Goff in this offense. He just got paid. He's got an incredible offensive line, and it's a good division. The NFC North should be very, very good. It's one of the better divisions in the entire league, and there's going to be a lot of high-scoring games. So happy to add that to my fantasy team. He's an easy guy to stack. If you're able to draft Amon-Ra St. Brown in the first round, this is a great stack that you can create by taking him, QB14. It's so late in the draft that you can definitely make that happen. Now, I do want to mention my honorable mention, and that's Kyler Murray. He's going at QB9, so I'm not going to go too much into Kyler Murray, but he's back. He's healthy. I think he has great weapons around him, as you're about to hear. And QB9, for somebody that has been a very consistent fantasy producer when healthy with a high rushing floor, those are players that I love to target. And I do want to mention one other thing that I forgot to mention with Anthony Richardson. But if you miss out on Richardson or Kyler Murray and you still want to go for kind of that riskier but running quarterback profile where you can get those huge, boom weeks, maybe take a look at Jaden Daniels at QB15. He's going pretty late. And for a quarterback that should run a lot, I think that's a good backup plan if you miss out on one of these other guys. All right. So moving on over to the running backs. Now, one player that we did talk about on the last show as well, Isaiah Pacheco. He's my guy at running back. RB12 is where he's going in sleeper drafts. And it's kind of the same reasons that I mentioned where he could be the number one running back, which, you'll have to go back and catch that episode if you've missed it. But he's on the best offense in the NFL, or certainly an offense that could be one of the best in the NFL. You've got Patrick Mahomes. You've got a much better group of receivers. Travis Kelce is still there. And there's no competition in Kansas City at running back. Isaiah Pacheco is going to be a high-volume goal line back, receiving back. He should see an increase in the workload that he got last year. He only had 205 carries, so I'm expecting an increase there. And again, it just comes down to staying healthy. As long as he stays healthy, which is the same story for everyone in the NFL, he can be a really good player this year. I think RB12 is a very good value. I think I have him ranked several spots higher than that. So a great player that I'm looking to add that's not going to cost you a first-round pick, in your redraft league. So you can load up on receiver early and still get a running back that should absolutely finish as a top 10 running back this season in fantasy. Now, my next two guys, frankly, both of these guys and my honorable mention go a bit later compared to Pacheco. And so if you are somebody that goes wide receiver heavy and you're doing the hero running back strategy or the zero RB strategy where you're taking multiple receivers in the first few rounds, taking an elite tight end or an elite quarterback, and you kind of punt on the running back position until the mid or later rounds, these are some guys that you can target that can really make that strategy work. So for me, the first guy on this list is James Conner. He's being drafted as RB20, and he's being drafted right behind DeAndre Swift, who I would rather have Conner than Swift. And James Conner was the running back 18 last season in 13 games, but he was the running back 13 in points per game, which is the better number to look at, especially with running backs. And if we take a look at his season, this is somebody that can do it all, right? He's a great pass catcher. He's a great runner. But the last 5 games of the season with a healthy Kyler Murray, James Conner in PPR scoring finished with 22 points, 18 points, 22 points, 26 points, and 30 points in his last 5 games. 22, 18, 22, 26, and 30. I mean, that is an incredible stretch. And that was with a healthy Kyler Murray. That was with a Trey McBride breakout. So I am very excited about James Conner. I'm not worried one bit about Trey Benson taking work from him. They needed a backup running back as it was. And Benson, to me, is actually being overdrafted. I just don't think he's going to play as much as a lot of people might think. This is definitely going to be James Conner's backfield. And so I'm not worried about anything else. Benson maybe will help Conner stay healthy for the full season, which would be nice, and has been rare that he stays healthy and doesn't miss games. And in fact, I think he's missed at least one game pretty much every year of his career. So, not the beacon of health, but a very good points per game running back, someone that given his cheap cost, is somebody that I think is an absolute smash play. And in both Dynasty and redraft, I'd be happy to have in my starting lineup. Next up is Chase Brown. He's my third guy at running back. He's being drafted as the running back 39. And this is, we're talking the same range as some backups. So everything that we've heard about Chase Brown in the preseason in the Bengals backfield leads me, and I think a lot of other people, to believe that Brown is going to be the Bengals running back 1. I think he originally, early in the summer, after free agency, especially in the spring, everyone thought that Zach Moss was going to be the starter. He had a good season last year with the Colts, signed the contract to head over to Cincinnati, but it's been all Chase Brown is all we've heard about in the preseason. Is getting a lot of work. I do believe that Moss has been a little bit banged up. So I don't know that Chase Brown is going to be, an RB1, but Can he be a very solid, upside player that can be an RB2, but you're drafting him as your RB3 or 4? I think absolutely. This is somebody that just has a very high upside because he's in one of these ambiguous backfields where, we expect the offense to be good and they're going to run the ball and he's going to have some pass catching opportunities. But I think there's a lot of people just a little bit scared of who to take. And so Brown is my guy here, and he's an explosive playmaker. He can catch passes. And so even though he maybe hasn't shown that he is quite as consistent or reliable in certain aspects compared to Moss, that's where I think that they can make a great pairing. And Chase Brown is the one that I think is going to have better fantasy value. And that's why at running back 39, I think he is a great value and somebody that was good enough to add to my guy list. All right, now, excuse me. So my honorable mention at the running back position is going to be Devin Singletary, who is being drafted as the running back 33. And so again, this is another running back that you can take later in your draft as an RB3, RB4, or if you're doing one of those zero running back type of strategies, maybe he's your RB2. Or if you're really roughing it, if you need somebody that you can get cheap, consistent production from and just to, not have somebody that's a total bust at the position as your RB1, Devin Singletary can still be that guy. I mean, you could have a Devin Singletary and Chase Brown pairing and just load up at wide receiver, which is a perfectly fine strategy. So he moves over to New York. He will be the definite starter there, and it's not going to be an incredible offense, of course, but should get a lot of volume and opportunity and some pass catching opportunities with the dump offs, given the subpar passing game. So Singletary to me is a pretty safe, high volume option later in drafts. All right, now moving on over to the wide receivers, and I've got a pretty interesting mix, I think, in terms of, where they're being drafted. So I'm going to start with my guy that's being drafted the latest of my trio here. And that is Buffalo Bills wide receiver Khalil Shakir, who's being drafted as the wide receiver 53 on Sleeper. And I think, right now he's being drafted between Tyler Lockett and Adonai Mitchell. I think that he will be far better than both, but especially Mitchell. Tyler Lockett, I think, has some sneaky late round value as it is for himself. But Shakir, to me, is somebody that I'm trying to grab late in pretty much every draft. I've been trying to trade for him in almost every league I can in Dynasty, and I've done that in several leagues. And this is because I think he's going to be Buffalo's wide receiver 1. Curtis Samuel is banged up. Keon Coleman has had some separation questions. We don't know, exactly what he will be. And certainly from a long-term dynasty standpoint, Keon Coleman could be great. But for this year, for redraft, for short-term dynasty help, and Khalil Shakir is still super young. So this is not some situation where he's, he might help for a season and then disappear. I mean, Khalil Shakir has real dynasty value in addition to redraft value. Now, the preseason reports have been great. Curtis Samuel is banged up. He's been battling a bit of an injury. So Shakir is somebody who his snap share increased a lot throughout last season. He ended up outproducing Stephon Diggs down the stretch in fantasy. So at wide receiver 53 prices with this type of, these question marks in the passing game for Buffalo, obviously Dalton Kincaid will be there and he'll be a valuable player at the tight end position. But Khalil Shakir, I think, can absolutely be a top 36 wide receiver. Now, I don't know if he's going to be a wide receiver 2. Top 24 is probably pushing it. That would be a pretty bold take. Now, if it hits, I'll take the credit. But Khalil Shakir, in my eyes, the number 1 receiver on this team. I think he's going to be a startable fantasy option, a flexible fantasy option if you are in a shallower or a redraft league, but certainly a starting flex option in dynasty leagues where you're usually starting 10 or 11 guys. So Khalil Shakir, wide receiver 53, smash play for me. I love taking him late in drafts, and he is my guy at wide receiver. Now, my second my guy, we're going to move over to the NFC North, the Green Bay Packers, wide receiver 46, Christian Watson. Now, someone has to be Green Bay's number one wide receiver, and I think it's going to be Christian Watson. He has shown a good connection with Jordan Love already. He's got huge play ability. He's a great red zone threat, and he seems to hopefully have finally, figured out these hamstring injuries that he's been having. So, assuming that some of those injury issues are not quite as prevalent, I believe it was, one hamstring was significantly stronger than the other, which is pretty wild. But he is somebody that, going at wide receiver 46, can truly be a huge difference maker for your fantasy team. Now, I don't think he has as much of a middle ground like somebody like Shakir, where, he's being drafted as a wide receiver 53 and, could easily end up somewhere in the wide receiver 30 to 36 range. Christian Watson is somebody that probably ends up, like, his ceiling is even higher. I mean, he could be somebody that breaks into the top 24. However, he is a much riskier option than somebody like Shakir because he absolutely could bust. There are a number of other talented receivers on the Packers offense, whether it be Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs. So lots of competition. But if he hits, and I think he will, I think that the numbers point to Christian Watson being the number one wide receiver, assuming the health is there, which, as we've said for a few of these players, a huge if. He can be somebody that has a massive impact on your fantasy team and can be a league-winning type of player. So I just acquired him in a Dynasty league. I have been hyping him up all offseason, but I actually, up until this point, I do not believe that I had him on a single Dynasty team, which is pretty insane, but I do now. I had a team that was rebuilding, and I traded away A.J. Brown along with Josh Downs to receive Christian Watson, two 2025 first-round picks and a third-round pick. So pretty good deal for my rebuilding team. And Christian Watson is somebody that I am betting on to take a big leap and to solidify himself as a long-term starter in fantasy. All right, now moving on to our third player on the list, my guy, and we're going to jump a bit earlier on the draft boards. Devonta Smith at wide receiver 24 from the Philadelphia Eagles. And Smith is going to be the primary slot receiver in Kellen Moore offense. A.J. Brown is still there. He's still going to be the number one. But Devonta Smith is going to get his catches. He's going to get his yards. This should be an elite offense, one of the best in the NFL. There's incredible weapons on this team. They just added Jahan Dotson, who I don't think that trade isn't going to do much for fantasy purposes. I think for Dotson, I think it's probably a sign that he is pretty much toast. But Dotson, will have an impact, probably a little bit more of a real life impact than fantasy. And a lot of that is going to be because he can play on the outside in 3 receiver sets to allow Smith to play in the slot, which is really, really good for Smith's fantasy value. So all of those things, factored in, Devonta Smith, I think, will absolutely outproduce his wide receiver 24 draft position. And he's got a lot of contingent upside as well, because if Goddard or Brown miss any time, Smith is going to skyrocket in this offense. So for the price that he's going at, I mean, wide receiver 24 is, he's going to be better than that. And so I would be happy to have him in, redraft leagues, dynasty leagues, wherever you can get him. He still obviously has a lot of youth. So pretty much no matter your format, great player to have on your roster and a slam dunk starting receiver for your fantasy team. Now, my honorable mention is going one wide receiver spot after Devonta Smith, and that's Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. And I have ended up acquiring him actually a decent amount in Dynasty this offseason. It's actually really funny because last year in a league where I had, I think I had the 9th pick in the draft following, the 2022 season. And I just, really wasn't thrilled with Zay Flowers as a prospect, but he was probably the player that I was going to take in that position. It was going to be between Flowers and Kincaid at the 109 in the rookie drafts, and that would have been in, May of 2023. So, but I just, I wasn't feeling it. I had my eye on some other guys in the second round if I could accumulate some picks. So I ended up trading that 109 for, I believe it was the 203 and James Conner and Gus Edwards, actually. And that ended up being a great trade for both teams, because the team that took the 109 in that trade ended up drafting Dalton Kincaid, who's been great. I ended up taking Sam Laporta with that early second-round pick, and then James Conner was a key member of my championship-winning team this past season. So great for everybody, but now all of a sudden I'm back in on Zay Flowers, who was very good in Baltimore, especially down the stretch. He really kind of hit his stride in the latter half of the season, which is what happens to a lot of first-round rookie receivers. And he developed really good chemistry with Lamar Jackson. And obviously it coincided a bit with Mark Andrews getting injured and missing time. So we'll see how that shakes out now, whether Andrews or Flowers will really be the true number one in this offense. But it's a good enough team, good enough offense, and there's really nobody else to be worried about from a fantasy aspect. So I think both guys can be highly productive players. And so Zay Flowers, somebody I think will take the next step and be a very good, solid week-to-week starting option in fantasy. All right, so moving on over to the tight ends, where, not as many options to choose from, but again, if you've been listening to this show throughout the summer, it should come as no surprise to you that my guy is Evan Engram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's being drafted on Sleeper in redraft as the tight end 8, and he was the tight end 2 last year. We talked about him on last episode as a sneaky player that can be number 1 at the position. He was number 2 last year, so there's certainly no reason to think he couldn't be top 5 again. Obviously, there were some injuries at the position and whatnot, but Engram is a reception machine, and he's a better choice in full PPR leagues. And if you're in a tight end premium league, he's absolutely a smash pick at his value. But he's a clear top 2 target in the passing game with Christian Kirk there in Jacksonville. Brian Thomas, I think, maybe jumps into that mix next year, but for now, I do like Kirk and Engram still at the top, and I've already said that I believe in Trevor Lawrence, so I think it goes hand in hand that I am also a fan of Engram, a fan of Kirk, so and I also like Travis Etienne as well. Jacksonville as a whole is just another offense that I am excited about, and probably a little bit more so than average. So Evan Engram, the first tight end on my guy list. Tight end number 2 that's a my guy is going to be Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals. He's being drafted now as the tight end 4 on Sleeper. I think last week it was a tight end 3, but now he's fallen down behind Mark Andrews to tight end 4. And it's not going to surprise me at all if Trey McBride is the tight end 1 overall in fantasy this year. Arizona should have a very good offense. McBride has a really good connection with Kyler Murray. Some attention is probably going to be taken away by, having Marvin Harrison there. Now, there's a possibility that could limit his ceiling. And maybe if McBride finishes as, somewhere in the tight end 3 to 7, 3 to 8 range, it will be because Marvin Harrison Jr. has such a special elite rookie season. So that's certainly in the range of outcomes. But, as you can tell, I do like the Arizona offense, and I think that he will be just fine. And he's being drafted, I believe, late enough. Tight end 4, it's still pretty early, but he's not going in the second or third round like a Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, which to me, I just don't think that either one of those players, especially if you're just in a regular half-point PPR or PPR league and you're not playing tight end premium, I don't think that Laporta or Kelsey are still good enough to return on that type of value. Now, if you're tight end premium, it's a different story. But if you want to get one of those elite tight ends, but you don't want to have to spend one of your first 3 picks on this player, I think getting Trey McBride in the 4th can be really good value and something that I will be looking to do on some of my teams. Now, my guy at the tight end position is Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's being drafted as the tight end 16. So this is a bit more of a sleeper pick, a late round guy, and he's really kind of my favorite late round tight end to choose from. I think he'll be the number 2 target on the Pittsburgh offense, assuming that no Brandon Ayuk trade materializes. He's been a very solid player in his career so far. He's just struggled a bit with having poor quarterback play, which unfortunately might continue. We'll see how Russell Wilson and Justin Fields do. I'm optimistic and hopeful for both. I have both of them on at least one team, if not 2. I think I have a Fields in a couple places, Wilson in at least one league as well. So I'm hopeful that they'll be solid for the sake of my Dynasty teams and for Pat Freiermuth, who I have in a number of places. But, it's a bit of a question mark, right? There is that it's probably going to be a more running-focused offense. But Pat Freiermuth is just a talented player, and I'm willing to bet on talent in fantasy, especially in offenses where there's no clear competition other than, in this case, the obvious wide receiver 1 in George Pickens. There's really nobody else on this offense that I'm that scared of taking targets away. So I think the upside is definitely there. If he's going to take that next step into joining kind of that top 10, top 12 of tight ends, he's probably got to do it this season. Otherwise, it probably is just never coming. So we'll see what happens. But Pat Freiermuth is a late round target that I like and am willing to make, and that is why he is my third my guy. Now, my final player that I'm going to talk about, my honorable mention at tight end, and this is obviously, we're getting pretty in the weeds here because when you're already picking 3 tight ends from a position where there's, probably not more than 20 real startable guys, we're getting pretty far down the list, but I just want to make a quick mention of Tucker Kraft at tight end 34. He's going undrafted in redraft leagues. He's going in the last round of best ball drafts. And Tucker Kraft is somebody with the Green Bay Packers who, if he had not suffered his pec injury this summer, I think would be taking the starting job away from Luke Musgraves. I'm much less bullish on that now. However, if you have a really deep bench, you're in a 14 or 16 team league, or you're in Dynasty and you're looking to make a low cost, potential buy low at tight end, Tucker Kraft is somebody that I would take that flyer on. I still think that at some point during the season, it's possible he takes over the starting spot. Luke Musgrave was hurt at times last year, which of course is what allowed Kraft to get on the field in the first place. So just something to keep an eye on. I'm not advocating that you necessarily draft him in a redraft league. I don't think that that's going to be necessary. That's going way too far, down the list. But someone to keep an eye on that I do like for that's maybe more of a future pick. But again, Tucker Kraft, Arizona, my honorable mention at tight end. All right, so there you have it. There's our full My Guys show. So again, at quarterback, we had Trevor Lawrence, Anthony Richardson, and Jared Goff. At running back, Isaiah Pacheco, James Conner, and Chase Brown. At wide receiver, Khalil Shakir, Christian Watson, and Devonta Smith. And at tight end, Evan Engram, Trey McBride, and Pat Freiermuth. So thank you all for listening. Hopefully this doesn't catch you too off guard to get in a Friday show, but there will not be a show on Monday because this will essentially count as the Monday show. But we'll be back again after that with some more episodes as we get ready to head right on into the NFL season. Thank you all for listening. This is the Dynasty War Room podcast, and we will talk to you all soon. Thanks so much.